prehistoric and historic baskets can be found in private collections and public museums throughout the world. Today we'll concentrate on those in the Nevada State Museum in Carson City.
It's a priceless collection. It's part of the heritage of the state. It's worth far more than just the money value that might be placed on it. Preservation of baskets is very important. We can hear a fan in the background, and that keeps the temperature and the humidity at a constant rate. So in order to preserve these materials for the future, we have to take these kinds of precautions.
Recent research, radiocarbon dates from small fragments of basketry in central Nevada, indicates that basketry was made in the Great Basin from at least 11,000 years ago. In terms of the Washoe technology, the coiled baskets that we see for the Washoe Indians show up about 4,300 years ago in western Nevada, probably 8,000 or more years ago in eastern Nevada, but a large gap in the central part of the state. So from 4,300 years ago to the historic Washoe, we more or less have a record of coiled basketry being made in the western Great Basin or western Nevada. And we have the historic northern Paiute in the area making a different technological style of basketry. Rather than coiled basketry, their principal style was diagonal twined basketry, a big difference in terms of manufacturer. Okay, do you want to grab the Paiute Cap?
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. We've got an ancient hat dated 1,400 years ago or so, and a cap that probably was made in the 1930s. The one is decorated with feathers, duck feathers, and is in a coiling technique. The other is a cap that uses natural materials and also kind of an overpainting in dye to make a decoration. Notice that the decoration, the way the caps are decorated overall, is different in both cases. You have a sort of central band as the focal point for the decoration, with different colors of feathers, the red, green, the mallard, and other feathers. This one, the design is laid out in 3 bands, and it is a weave structure that's creating the difference, plus the overpainting. Caps were functional pieces, and possibly in this case a ceremonial piece, something to be worn on special occasions. The Paiute Cap that we see here, Northern Paiute Cap, these were often worn when people were out collecting seeds, and especially collecting pine nuts. Pitch from the pine nuts often gets in your hair, and so it was a way for women to basically push their hair up underneath the cap if it's large enough. Sometimes the caps are too small for that. There's quite a bit of variation in the size and shape. Some were made for little girls so that they would have a head covering. The cap also protects from the wear of the tump line, which is a way of suspending a burden basket on your back. And there's a line that comes across the forehead, and the cap protects the woman's head and forehead from the wear of the tump line.
Let me get this box out of the way here, get a better view.
Notice also the beautiful box that has been made by one of Jean's volunteers to house these caps, or this particular cap. It's hard to believe that this cap is really as old as it is. It's absolutely beautiful. The feathers are still largely in place as they were when it was probably first woven. Let's take a look at another example. of some of the local weaving. This is a Shoshone basket, Western Shoshone. We don't know too much about it, but it probably dates to the period somewhere between the 1920s to the 1940s at maximum. You see here yet, in comparison, a different kind of design. Both this basket and the early prehistoric one we looked at are done in what's called a coiling technique, which is you sew over a circular foundation, and I think you can see the similarities in the weave. The one that we have here, this cap, the Northern Paiute Cap, is done in a twining technique, which is slightly different. And part of the technicalities of studying basketry is to understand the differences in techniques. This piece is decorated with dyed material, and most of the dyes in this particular case come from commercial sources rather than from natural sources. Notice that they have faded on the exterior, but on the interior they're bright and shiny. Part of the importance of baskets is basically preserving them and keeping them in excellent shape. In this case, these dyes do tend to fade in the light, and so the only way that one could have preserved the color in this basket, was to keep it totally in the dark, or at least away from any kind of direct sunlight. This case contains a variety of baskets from Nevada as well as from California, and included are some of the treasures that are important specifically in the western part of Nevada, and those are beaded baskets. And beading over baskets developed around 1910, first in the Mono Lake country, and then Northern Paiute people and Washoe people up here in western Nevada began to bead over their baskets. In this particular case, the basket is made first, and then the beading is done afterwards. Notice that the beadwork on this one is coordinated in terms of colors too. We've got birds and flowers, and then basically a geometric pattern on the bottom, also butterflies. This particular basket is Northern Paiute from Pyramid Lake. We don't know the name of the artist in this particular instance, but it's a beautiful piece.
At the time of our visit, the exhibit in the middle gallery includes a variety of baskets made over a range of time, including a number of works by the famous Washoe weaver Duxelle.
The first case that I'll be discussing is the traditional Washoe basketry case, and these are baskets that were largely collected locally by Dr. S.L. Lee, a physician here in town, and who was also Duxelle Lee's physician. These baskets were collected in the Indian camps, which at that time were associated with the ranches and farms here in Eagle Valley and also to the south of us in Carson Valley. These baskets were used by the Washoe for such purposes as cooking and storing food, as well as their personal eating bowls that we have here. One thing to note is that virtually all of these utilitarian baskets are decorated very beautifully with designs that were woven into the fabric of the basket with contrasting fibers, typically bracken fern root collected from the Sierra Nevada, or more rarely the Carson Range just outside of town here. These baskets date to the late part of the 19th century, and that's when Dr. Lee went out collecting the baskets. We have very good documentation from his ledger that he kept, and he noted which ranch he visited, how much he paid the Native American, typically the Washoe Indian, for the basket that he purchased, and rarely the name of the maker of the basket. Now you have to remember the setting for the collection of these baskets by Dr. Lee in the late 1890s was one of which was a time of transition for the Washoe Indians. They had lost their traditional lifeways beginning in the 1850s with the settlement in Carson Valley and also at Dayton, and loss of their traditional lands to mining, but more importantly, ranching and farming. So for some of the Indians, they associated themselves with the ranches and farms, and at this time they were replacing their basketry with metal pots and pans and crockery. They were changing their weaving so that they could provide laundry baskets for the ranchers' wives. But more importantly, in terms of the collection here at the Nevada State Museum, we have the arts and crafts movement appearing in Nevada. It started decades earlier elsewhere in Europe and the United States, but Nevada pretty much hit right around the turn of the century. And what we have is a complete change in the design of the Washoe baskets. And we have Duxelle Ali as the instigator of change here in western Nevada. And it's possibly, it was possibly influenced by her patrons, Abe and Amy Cohen. But it did start a revolution in Washoe basketry, and as we'll see, baskets were no longer made to be used as utilitarian objects. They were actually woven as works of art. Let's take a look at the Duxelle Ali baskets dating from the late 1890s to about 1925, the year of her death. This small, modest basket here is a good example of an early Duxelle Ali basket. It's small in scale. The designs are in bracken fern only, and if you look at the motif, it just goes straight up and down the basket. And this is very typical of a Washoe placement of a design, but the shape, as you saw in the other case, is completely different than the traditional baskets that Dr. Lee collected. As you'll notice, the shape is a globular shape with the sides curving inward rather than the more or less flower pot shape, which is more amenable to using as a storage or cooking basket, because you can get things in and out much easier, and it's easier to clean too. These baskets, that one in particular, was made for Dr. Lee as a commissioned piece, and it probably was influenced by the pomo basketry, which was already popular in the 1800s in California. For Duxelle Ali's baskets, the Cohns, her patrons, ran a store called the Emporium, and they sold baskets kind of as a sideline to begin with, but as the arts and crafts movement gained momentum, they specialized more and more in Duxelle Ali's baskets, and you'll notice the size got dramatically larger. There's actually another color that comes in, and this is redbud, a plant that grows on the western slope of the Sierra Nevada, very common over there, but it is uncommon. I don't know of any patches that grow on the eastern slope of the Sierra, the Carson Range. This was a time period when these baskets were made to be sold. But these baskets, Duxelle Ali's in particular, were made to be sold to wealthy individuals. This basket was made in the early 1900s, and the asking price was $2,000 in early 1900 dollars. So that translates to many tens of thousands of dollars today. Of course, in today's market, as collector's value, that basket is valued over $1 million today. The baskets change shape. The widest portion of the basket can be weighted toward the top, or in some instances toward the bottom, and more commonly it's weighted in the center, so the center is wider, the widest portion of the basket. One of the characteristics of her baskets also is a change in the placement and the theme of the designs. You'll notice in this basket, this high-waisted basket, this vase-like shape, the designs are in bands, in lines across the basket, horizontal bands. In this basket here, which is an early basket, we have the basket motifs going up and down the basket, but they're curved slightly to emulate the curvature of the basketry shape itself to complement the shape of the basket. And finally, this is a late basket from the mid-1920s, and you can see that the basket is decorated with a spiral motif. So she experimented with the placement of the designs as well as the nature of the designs being depicted on the baskets. One of the common questions we get is, are these symbols representative of any deep meaning in Washoe culture? And when the early anthropologists around the early 1900s asked the weavers what the designs meant, they said they're just pretty designs, unless the design represented a butterfly that you could see clearly on the basket, which is kind of rare with Washoe baskets. These two large baskets on the bottom of the case are by, on the left-hand side there, Tootsie Dick, and on the right-hand side, Lena Frank Dick. And these baskets are large baskets, as similar in shape to Duxelle Lee's basket, similar in size to Duxelle Lee's basket, but by other weavers. And you'll notice on both of the baskets very different designs, both from each other as well as from Duxelle Lee. Rebecca Eagle is of Northern Paiute, Washoe, and Shoshone heritage, and this basket represents those three Native American groups. The basket she didn't weave, but is a Western Shoshone basket, and the images are those within Northern Paiute and Washoe territories. Rebecca began decorating baskets with pictorial designs about 15 to 20 years ago at the request of a basketry collector from Northern California. And she's decorated some 40 baskets in this fashion. The image that you see here is actually the tufa formation out at Pyramid Lake known as the Stone Mother. But in this instance, Rebecca modeled the Stone Mother after her grandmother, a Washoe weaver. The scarf that you see is decorated with roses, and that was her grandmother's silk scarf, as well as the blanket that she tied about her waist. And the gathering basket for the Stone Mother has been turned into a Washoe basket. One aspect of our collection is that it continues to grow with basketry that we get from various residents in the state, either collections that are historic in nature, or in this case, possibly prehistoric. This is a cradle board from the Winnemucca Lake area, private property. As most of us know nowadays, we can't go out in the desert and dig up artifacts or actually even pick up arrowheads on archaeological sites, as there are laws that are actually enforced nowadays. Many residents, longtime residents of Nevada, have objects that they collected either intentionally or unintentionally out hunting. What many people do is either anonymously or directly, they donate these materials to the museum, and we incorporate them into our collection for others to enjoy and to preserve them for future generations.